grew up on the outskirts of a small southern town. I spent most of my summer vacation days prowling the woods close to my home. There was a sandy stretch of beach along a creek, about a town house, down dirt roads and overgrown deer trails. Since it was so far removed from civilization, and I had never seen another soul out there, I would often go for a swim on my own in the cool water under the summer sun. Being a hot day, I decided to go to my secret beach and bathe in the river. I had spent all morning there, watching the herons hunt in the water while I splashed around happily. Suddenly, I began to hear the sounds of something large forcing its way through the undergrowth upstream. I was frozen, standing in my bathers in the middle of the creek as two men emerged from the woods. They were much older than me, probably in their 30s. Something about the way they were dressed scared me. Anyone who had spent a lot of time in the woods knows the danger of thorn vines and blackberry bushes. But these guys were dressed in flip-flops, cargo shorts and tank tops. They were filthy and covered in scratches across their arms and legs, looking as if hiking through the woods hadn't ever been on their agenda. I had left my clothes in an untidy pile on the bank, but to grab them, I would have had to move much closer to the men. As I frantically tried to think of a way to get to my clothes without alerting these guys, one of them turned and locked eyes with me. He elbowed his buddy in the ribs, pointed at me, and whispered something beyond my hearing. They both turned and began to advance towards me with malicious grins on their faces. I officially started panicking. Luckily, years of spending all my free time in the woods paid off. I spun around and sprinted for the closest downstream deep channel. As I dove into the water, I could hear the men yelling and splashing behind me, trying desperately to catch up. I had always been at home in the water, and at this moment I swam as though my life depended on it. Keeping a good pace, I started to feel confident that I lost the creeps. I stopped for a second and let the flow of the river take me. I heard nothing. Should she keep swimming downriver into the rapids? Or risk being seen swimming into her hiding spot? I knew exactly where I needed to go. Earlier that summer, I had discovered what I thought of as my secret hiding spot, an area that led off the side of the river into a lagoon. The banks were rocky on both sides, and during a previous swim, I watched muskrats swim in the water. I noticed one swim through some hanging vines into what I thought was solid stone. Upon pulling back the vines and scaring the life out of the muskrats in the process, I found an open space under an overhang of the rock. I'd always loved hiding and was immediately thrilled with such a perfectly camouflaged spot. As I came close to my hiding spot, I ducked down and swam underwater for quite a while. I only surfaced once I was safely behind the curtain of the vines. I waited there for several minutes, trying my best to silence my heavy breathing and slow down my thumping heartbeat, until I heard the sound of heavy footsteps ploughing through the bushes above my head. I screamed a little, but thankfully I clamped my hand over my mouth in time to muffle it. As the sounds of snapping twigs and rustling leaves got closer, I could hear the men panting and cursing under their breath. It sounded as if they were walking on the edge of the bank right next to me. After they had moved further down the creek, I heard a thud on the ground and an angry yell, as if one of the men had tripped and fallen. Another voice shushed him and said something that made me tremble. "Be quiet. She'll hear you." I'd never been more terrified in my life. I cried silently, pressing my back against the rock and praying they wouldn't find me. Even after I heard their footsteps continuing down the bank and into silence, I remained hidden behind the vines. Remain behind the vines until it almost gets dark? Or as soon as you hear them move off into the distance, head back to the clothes and race home before freezing to death? I waited only a little while as I started to shiver, and I was certain the men had moved on down the creek. I quietly peered out through the vines to make sure the men had left, and on seeing nothing and feeling anxious, I waste no time and start making my way back to my clothes. After I swim, I quietly walked along the deer track and spotted my clothes next to the sandy beach. Then instantly, a rat jumped out from above me. I screamed in shock and almost fell over, but on seeing the rat run along the bank, it made me laugh in relief as I watched it enter the creek. Oh my god, it's the guys from before. Remain behind the vines until it almost gets dark. I stayed there, delirious with fear and shivering in the water for quite a while. The sun started to dip low and my shivering became intense. I could no longer feel my body. I had to leave now, or I'm not going to survive this cold. I made the decision to head back to my clothes, then home. I slowly swam along the creek and treaded silently along the riverbed. When I got close to the beach, I stayed hidden in the undergrowth and watched for several minutes to make sure those two slime balls weren't anywhere to be seen. Thankfully, they weren't, although I found several footprints circling my clothing and pacing along the bank. It looked like they were here but had moved on. My mother about what happened at the creek, because I knew she would ban me from ever going into the woods again. I never saw those guys again, nor did I ever see anyone else head down that stretch of beach after that. But needless to say, I had to find somewhere else safe to swim and cool off.